Two of the most powerful men alive sat across from each other in Beijing. And when they were done talking, one of them walked out and told the cameras something no one fully expected. China's leader just promised not to arm Iran. That alone would be significant. But here's the part that stops you cold. The same week that promise was made, Beijing's own government issued a legal order telling Chinese companies to keep buying Iranian oil and ignore American sanctions while doing it. Same government, same week, opposite directions. So which one do you believe? This is Beijing, May 2026. A summit that has been building for months finally happened. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, face-to-face in the Zhongnanhai compound, the nerve center of Chinese power. The conversations covered trade, Taiwan, technology, but the issue that carried the most immediate weight, the one that connects directly to oil markets, military logistics, and an active conflict, was Iran. Trump came to this meeting with a specific demand: stop enabling Iran, stop the oil money, stop the weapons pipeline. And according to Trump himself, speaking to Fox News host Sean Hannity on Thursday night, he got an answer. Xi told him directly that China would not supply Iran with military equipment, and Trump called it, in his own words, a big statement. This is a developing story moving at speed. If you want straight, fact-based coverage without the spin, subscribe now, because the next 72 hours on this could reshape several active negotiations simultaneously. Let's go back to the beginning of this week and understand what this summit was actually built around. Trump has spent months pressing China on two connected problems. The first is trade, tariffs, deficits, market access. That's the economic argument. The second is something harder to see, but arguably more dangerous: Beijing's role as the financial backbone of Iran's economy. The U.S. position, held by multiple administrations, but pursued with particular intensity under Trump, is that China's oil purchases are the primary reason Iran can continue operating at any meaningful level. Without that revenue, the argument goes, Tehran's military posture collapses. Without that posture, the pressure calculus in the region shifts completely. U.S. officials have repeatedly accused China of propping up Iran's military and economic strength through oil purchases, dual-use exports, and intermediary networks. These aren't abstract allegations. They're the basis of active sanctions enforcement and the source of a standoff that has been simmering between Washington and Beijing for years. Now, here's where this week gets complicated. According to Reuters data cited in reporting, China purchases approximately $31 to $32 billion worth of Iranian crude annually. That figure is not a secret. It is enormous. It funds the Iranian government in ways that direct military aid never could, because it's consistent, legal under Chinese law, and nearly impossible to fully choke off. Trump walked into Beijing knowing this number. And then, just days before the summit, Beijing did something that looked like a direct provocation. China's Commerce Ministry invoked a 2021 blocking statute that bars Chinese companies from complying with what Beijing calls illegitimate foreign sanctions. The order specifically targeted Chinese refiners, including large independent processors known as teapot refineries, that the United States had accused of buying sanctioned Iranian crude. In plain language, just before sitting down with Trump to talk about Iran, China passed a law telling its own companies to keep doing exactly what Washington was demanding they stop. And then came the summit and the pledge. Trump, speaking on Hannity, said Xi told him clearly and strongly that China would not give military equipment to Iran, and that Xi also offered to assist in ending the conflict, saying in Trump's account, "If I can be of any help at all, I would like to be of help." Trump called this a major win. He called it a big statement, and he repeated that description twice in his remarks. But here's the question that nobody in that room answered publicly. The pledge covers military equipment. The blocking statute covers oil. Are those two things separate enough to satisfy Washington? Or does one cancel out the credibility of the other? That answer, right now, does not exist. Xi pledged no weapons. Fine. But the companies still buying Iranian oil just got legal cover from Beijing to keep doing it. So what exactly changed inside that meeting room? To understand why this summit conversation has immediate real-world consequences, you have to understand one body of water. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, flanked on one side by Iran, on the other by Oman and the UAE. And through that gap flows roughly 1/5 of all the oil traded on Earth on any given day. Tankers carrying crude for Japan, South Korea, India, China, and European buyers pass through it constantly. Close it, or credibly threaten to close it, and oil prices spike within hours. Markets react, supply chains lock up, heating costs rise, airline fuel surcharges appear, supermarket logistics shift. Ordinary people in countries with no connection to the underlying conflict pay a price. Trump noted during his Hannity interview that Xi specifically said he wanted the Strait of Hormuz kept open and opposed the imposition of transit tolls. That detail is revealing. It tells you China's economic self-interest in Hormuz is not theoretical. China needs that strait open because its own oil supply, including those $31 billion in annual Iranian crude purchases, moves through it. Xi is not protecting Hormuz out of international goodwill. He's protecting it because closing it would hurt Beijing as much as anyone. This creates an unusual alignment of incentives. The U.S. wants Hormuz open. China wants Hormuz open. Iran, at least at the rhetorical level, has periodically threatened to close it when under pressure, which means all three parties have a stake in what happens next, but for completely different reasons, with different leverage, and without a shared framework for managing the risk. Now layer in the oil deal that Trump also announced from Beijing. Trump said he believes an agreement will be reached under which China buys oil from the United States, with Chinese ships heading to Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska, and said this appeared to be agreed to during the trip. If that deal materializes, and it is not confirmed as a signed agreement at this point, it would be strategically significant. China, reducing its Iranian oil dependency in favor of American supply, would, over time, undermine the financial pipeline that Tehran depends on. It would also create a commercial linkage between the two economies that both sides have incentive to protect. But here's the contradiction hiding inside that optimism. Beijing just issued a blocking statute protecting the companies buying Iranian oil. If China is genuinely planning to shift its purchases toward American crude, why protect the Iranian oil buyers at all? Either the shift is real and the statute is a bargaining chip, or the statute is real and the deal announcement is a gesture. You cannot read both moves as sincere simultaneously. Do you think this situation produces a real agreement, or are we watching two governments perform diplomacy while neither side fundamentally changes course? Drop your take in the comments below. There is something in this story that is not getting nearly enough attention. The White House did not immediately confirm Xi's pledge on military equipment. The White House and the Chinese embassy in Washington both declined to respond to requests for comment on the matter when contacted by Fox News Digital. Think about that for a moment. The President of the United States went on national television and described a major security commitment from China's leader, and his own White House had nothing to say. No confirmation, no statement, no readout. That could mean the pledge is still being formalized. It could mean internal verification is ongoing. Or it could mean the pledge exists exactly as described, in a private conversation with no written agreement, no enforcement mechanism, and no independent confirmation. History is full of private pledges that were sincere in the room and forgotten by morning. Step back from the summits and the oil statistics for a moment. Think about who actually lives inside all of this. Start in the Strait of Hormuz itself, not as a map coordinate, but as a working waterway. Thousands of maritime workers, tanker crew members, port operators, and logistics personnel move through that region every single week. They are not diplomats. They are not generals. They are people doing their jobs in a body of water that has been, periodically over the past several decades, a flashpoint for seizures, confrontations, and near incidents. One video associated with this reporting shows Iran seizing a ship off the coast of the UAE, a reminder that the threat environment in that corridor is not hypothetical. Vessels have been boarded, crews have been detained, cargo has been impounded. Insurance rates in the region reflect a risk premium that shipping companies calculate carefully every time they route a tanker through. And the people on those tankers? They hear about the summit, they hear about the pledges, they also hear about the seizures. Now zoom out from the water to the markets. Trump's announcement of a potential deal in which China would buy American oil prompted a spike in oil prices, a direct, immediate market reaction to words spoken in a press setting. That is how connected the language of this summit is to the financial lives of ordinary people. A president says a deal might happen. Traders move, prices shift. People filling up at a gas station 3 continents away feel it, even if they never heard the interview. This is the part of geopolitics that never makes the summit photographs. The family in South Asia managing a small transport business on tight margins. The fishermen in the Gulf whose insurance premiums climbed when Hormuz last made headlines. The factory manager in South Korea calculating fuel input costs for the next quarter. None of them voted on any of this. None of them have a seat at the table in Zhongnanhai. All of them will feel whatever comes next. And for the millions of people across China whose government just ordered the companies around them to defy American sanctions, there's a quieter pressure building too. The more aggressively Beijing shields its Iranian oil trade, the louder Washington's enforcement response is likely to become. Secondary sanctions, banking restrictions, trade penalties targeting the exact teapot refineries that Beijing's blocking statute was designed to protect. These are not abstract. Secondary sanctions hit real businesses. They hit jobs. They hit supply chains that ordinary Chinese citizens and workers depend on, even if the political logic behind them is invisible from the factory floor. And then there's Iran itself. The population of Iran has lived through decades of sanctions, economic contraction, currency crises, and geopolitical isolation. The question of whether China continues buying Iranian oil is not for most Iranians a headline. It is the difference between a government that can fund basic services and one that cannot. Xi's pledge not to supply military equipment, if it holds, does not change that underlying economic relationship. The oil money was always the bigger number. The weapons were the louder symbol. So for ordinary Iranians navigating their daily lives inside a country under pressure from multiple directions, the practical question coming out of this summit is simpler and harder than anything discussed in the Zhongnanhai compound. What changes, and for whom? Here's what the next few weeks will test. If China's pledge on military equipment is real, we should see concrete evidence, either in verified reporting, changes in dual-use export patterns, or some form of official confirmation. If we don't, the pledge becomes noise. The blocking statute is still active. It is law. Chinese companies are still legally covered to buy Iranian oil. Until that changes, or until the American oil deal is signed and deliveries actually begin, the strategic picture stays roughly the same. And there's one more pressure point nobody is fully discussing yet. The Iran nuclear negotiations are ongoing. The U.S. is pressing for a deal. If Beijing genuinely wants to help broker a resolution, as Xi suggested, that creates a potential opening, but also a potential fault line. Because Beijing's definition of an acceptable Iran deal and Washington's definition are not the same. China needs Iran economically. America needs Iran contained strategically. Those two objectives can coexist, but they can also collide. And when they collide, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the answer nobody wants. Here is the simplest way to frame what just happened in Beijing. Two governments that compete intensely, distrust each other structurally, and are locked in a trade war that has reshaped the global economy. Those two governments just found one issue where their economic interests briefly align. Neither wants the Strait of Hormuz closed. Neither wants an oil shock. Neither wants a regional war that disrupts the energy flow both of them depend on. That alignment is real, but it is narrow, and it is fragile. Because everything else around it, the Taiwan question, the sanctions enforcement battle, the tech restrictions, the competing alliances, is still fully active. Xi's warning to Trump reported separately that there could be clashes and conflicts if the relationship was not managed carefully. That did not come from a position of comfort. It came from a leader who knows how many pressure points currently exist between these two countries. The pledge on military equipment, if it holds, is genuinely meaningful. Not because China was necessarily the primary supplier of Iranian weapons, the picture there is complex, but because a public commitment, even an informal one, creates a standard. It creates something to measure. And it creates accountability because Trump has now told the American public what Xi said. The oil deal, if it materializes, is the more consequential long-term move. Shifting China's energy purchasing away from Iranian crude toward American supply would, over years, alter the financial oxygen available to Tehran in ways that sanctions alone have struggled to achieve. But both of those outcomes depend on follow-through, on verification, on enforcement, on neither side deciding that domestic pressures require a different posture next month.
And that is what intelligence agencies on multiple continents are now watching carefully. Not the summit photographs, not the diplomatic language, the actual behavior of Chinese refiners, of Iranian military logistics, of market movements, of tanker traffic through the strait. The private room in Zhongnanhai produced a conversation. What it produces beyond that is not yet written. What we know is that the framework for either a genuine reduction in tension or a major collision is now more clearly defined than it was a week ago. That is something. Whether it's enough is the question nobody in that room answered out loud. This situation moves in real time, and the next development could come from any direction. A signed oil agreement, a confirmed weapons shipment that contradicts the pledge, a new round of sanctions enforcement, a Hormuz incident that resets every calculation made this week. What do you think actually came out of this summit? A real shift or a managed performance? Drop your analysis in the comments because the people watching this one are sharp and this conversation is worth having. Subscribe if you want every major update as this develops. The next chapter of this story is already forming.